Two, one. Okay, you're listening to Long Live Podcasts. I'm James Reardon Waters, and I'm joined by Rachel Gerard once again. It's been a while. How are you doing?
Hello, I'm fine. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm good. So we want to discuss a kind of I've sort of noticed that there's a bit of it's quite a tricky conversation because there's a lot of angles to it. But I wanted to sort of discuss three sort of ideas, and they're existentialism, morality, and God's will. And we were discussing a little earlier, just now, about this certain idea of for example, the existentialist idea of morality, it places a lot of primacy on individual freedom, but also by that respect, responsibility. And Sartre, for example, which I've been reading in his book, Existentialism and Humanism, is a big proponent of the fact that we can choose what we want to do and we can choose what's moral for us. He also believes in responsibility. He believes that for every decision we make, we are responsible for that action. So he's a believer of cause and effect, as you said. But the biggest thing that he says, well, the biggest thing he says in relation to God is that there is no preordained human nature, human value, or human morality or objective morality. So we are completely in the favor of we're completely able to choose what we want, choose what we believe is right for us. He even believes that in the state of intervention, from what I've read, I haven't read too much of him, but he even believes that if we had an intervention or a vision from God, then we would still be able to decide what we wanted to do because we are individuals and we have the ability to do that. And where this sort of goes complete, I think it's a very fascinating idea. I think it's very, and I do agree with it for a lot of parts. There are certain ideas of both mine and perhaps the spiritualists' perspective that goes against this sort of idea. So, for example, the idea of God being this deity we've already discussed isn't exactly what a lot of religious people believe, and I think it's hard to work out. But I think one of the biggest things that Sartre leaves out is a prescription on how to actually obtain one's individual freedom. And I think another interesting point is what one's best interests are, and how Sartre prescribes which prevailing decision from the person's consciousness is the best one. And this goes into like my idea of what's real in the world. And I believe that we should base our morality, subjective or objective, on what's actually real in the world, and what, as opposed to sort of conceptual, lingual, unreal thinking, before we actually approach what we can objectively define as rational creatures as what's the right thing to do. And because I don't think it's as simple as we are completely free as autonomous individuals to just decide exactly. I think there's an interdependence between what we want and what the world desires from us. I mean, of course, Sartre is a big proponent of the idea of bad faith. That is the idea that, you know, any individual who thinks that they're not acting freely, even though they could be, is acting in bad faith, which I think is a very interesting concept. But I still believe that, there's that this difference between the self and the world isn't quite as big a difference as one would believe. And there's a certain aspect of the world, if I'm saying it very crudely, that determines what a best course of action is in things, that, you know, that we couldn't necessarily decide in a vacuum, for example. I think that's the biggest thing, is there's no vacuum in which we can then sort of decide things, which I'm not saying Sartre is disagreeing with it, because he actually does agree with it, but he agrees that we can only act in a certain situation. But over the question of a prescription on which path of action to take, or which decision in the many conflicting decisions that go on in one's head one should choose, I think is an interesting thing to discuss. And especially when one discusses something like spirituality and what we can get onto about, you know, the sort of the nature of God's will, should we say, also quite crudely, or other ways in which the world sort of reveals itself to you as wanting a sort of this moral objective is coming out as opposed to a mere individual freedom. So there's a lot to unpack there. But is there anything that you can go off of that?
Well, it looks to me he's got a little bit of a contradiction going on, in that correct me if I'm wrong, but
Sure.
he seems to be saying that you can decide to do whatever you want, knowing that cause and effect is a thing.
Hmm.
So effectively, it's like whatever you do, you're going to be reined in. There'll be boundaries created because you know that something bad will happen to you if you do something. So it's kind of relying on, well, everybody's going to have boundaries in place because they're quickly going to realize that if they do act badly, they're going to get retaliated upon by other people. So that in itself should kind of rein people in a little bit. But then he also has the idea of humans not having an inherent nature. So those two ideas tend to be a little bit contradictory, because if he's saying that you're going to be reined in by boundaries that you create for yourself by acting and then having a consequence happen to you, that's kind of relying a little bit on humans being kind of okay in nature, like we're not inherently evil, for example.
Yeah.
Or not able to be programmed to an extent where all of our actions would just be completely chaotic and
No.
we'd all kill each other. So that comes down to, like you're saying, he's kind of hypothesized about something without coming up with the prescription of how to do that.
Right.
And my argument would be, and this is purely based on my own experience,
Of
when
course, yeah,
you
of
have
course.
these ideas that are rooted in logic, you take it to its logical conclusion with language, right?
Yeah.
And then you start traveling down that road and it changes because your experiences are not what you would have anticipated.
Yeah, right. And this is actually interesting because it makes me think of a very pessimistic. It's quite a pessimistic outlook of existentialists because they believe that there are. I don't want to strawman anything too much because I'm still very new to actually reading existential literature, but they do have this idea that we are forever burdened with not knowing whether the decision we made is the right decision. I don't think it's necessarily wrong, but I think the language game that it plays is a little pessimistic and it's not quite up to standards in terms of how, of course we're going to be of course the situation is going to be ambiguous on whether we did the right thing or not. But there's something I'm trying to say here. It's I have had a couple of beers and I'm probably going to be drinking a third beer, so I will be so this is going to be quite a loose podcast.
It's loosening the cogs, that's all right.
Loosening the cogs, yeah. But yeah, I find it pessimistic in its notion that things that we have to be burdened by decisions we've made at all, and that the whole idea is completely ambiguous. Because I think if you really pay attention to how the world reveals itself to you, I think there's a necessity to navigate to sort of to find out how the world is navigating you and what decisions are right and what decisions are wrong. I don't think it's as simple as like it might be as simple as you're never going to know, but I don't think it's a very pragmatic approach to when we're talking about things that are actually moral. This is like Beauvoir talks about this I haven't read the book, but she sort of talks she talks a lot about individual freedom and personal responsibility, and her book's called The Ethics of Ambiguity, and I haven't read it. I've read a bit of secondary literature on it, but she a lot from what I know about her. There's always going to be that ambiguity about whether you did the right thing or not, but I think it could be. I think it could, as far as I know, I think it could be taken further into knowing. How do I say? Into sort of navigating yourself into what the world actually tells you, I suppose. Does that make any sense?
Yeah. So I think the idea of kind of never knowing, and like we can apply that to anything, and it seems quite a lazy argument. But I mean, there is that side of it. But you got to remember that it's people who are involved in this. It's not just pure logic that's out there somewhere that exists in a vacuum and that there's no people. So the actual want to be certain, that is of the flesh. Like that's something it's kind of a self-will thing. And it's rooted in non-acceptance and playing God, actually, because you're trying to set yourself up as somebody who can judge all, and nobody can do that.
Yeah.
But actually saying that you're not satisfied with that is self-will, but also clinging on to the notion of, well, we can never know because we're finite or whatever. That's
Right.
also
That's actually like,
self-will. That's self-will as well, because you're still trying to appease yourself and appease yourself into kind of being okay with it, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of, I don't know, for me it's like that's where I understand the logic and I can go with you to the logical conclusion of many roads. I think forgetting what type of person you're dealing with, it makes a world of difference. It's like night and day. Somebody who is making their decisions based on self-will, even if those things are not harming anyone else, and somebody who's basing their decisions on, I'll say, the spirit, or from a place of humbleness, all sorts of different ways of describing it. But you know what I mean? We were talking about it last time.
Yeah. I think I want to point out that the idea of self-will, your idea of self-will, is very different from Sartre's idea of the radical free self, or the being for itself, as he calls it. And yeah, I think it's interesting because your idea of self-will, for example, is a much more perverse idea of sort of not necessarily all of yourself, but a certain part of yourself is dedicated to, as you said, playing God and determining what is right for themselves in a sort of logical, non-reductive kind of not really paying attention to the world. And I think the existentialists, I mean, as many philosophers do, because it's analytic, because philosophy for the most part is based off of rationality, for better or for worse, is sort of lacking in focus on what is genuine, what again, it's a horrible way of saying it, but what the world provides to them. Because as I was sort of saying, we're not ultimately separate from the world, and there's a sort of ignoring of this idea of the world as not God, but not like the sky daddy, as you've said before, but the world as not transcendent either, but sort of signifying to you what the right thing and the wrong thing really is. And I'll probably get it's a hard road to go down, but like as I've been reading, there's a sort of, as for for a lot of philosophy, and I respect a lot of it, but there's I respect it hugely, but there's a lack of sort of understanding the will of the world, if you could say it like that, or the will of like the real self, or whatever, the will that transcends absolute decisions that imply that you're an independent self, and you can decide what exactly is going on. So decide as if you had a proper grasp on what the situation is. So
Yeah, because
very bad way of saying it, but
it's, if somebody was an empty open vessel, but nobody is. Everybody is full of trauma. They're full of
Yeah, that's a really
triggers. We're programmed. That's something we can observe, is that humans are so programmable, and we're able to have we're able to do complete 180s on our belief systems as well, you know. And you see people, you know, committing jihad for their beliefs. They, like, they'll go that far, and that's through all sections of the world. People have died for their beliefs when they have, you know, no proof of what they're doing it for.
yeah.
And that's, I don't think you can ignore how programmable humans are. I think that's very important. So the idea of freedom, is it true freedom? Is that the way they would be if they had a different upbringing, for example?
Well, I'm sure Sartre would argue that those people simply are living in bad faith, but it still ignores a prescription on what is. I keep losing my train of thought here. It's probably the beers, but like this is the thing. I realize that I'm speaking and I just like lose what I'm talking about. It's quite a common thing, especially if you're drinking and you're being filmed. But again, I think Sartre ignores like a prescription on ways. I mean, I haven't read extensively his literature, and like, you know, I'm yet to read Being in Nothingness, which is his big book, and to see what his takes on morality is there. But there's a definite kind of like lack of prescription in sort of ways we can recognize what makes us unfree, and also a sort of exterior idea into outside of we are simply free to do what we want to do, because I mean, as Sartre would say, he you know, that there is no existence precedes essence, there is no inherent moral value that we can adhere to. But it's a weird one. It's a weird one to explain, because I'm trying to listen to what he says, and it really makes a lot of sense. But I'm also sensing like a ignoring of like a spiritual side of things in ways that meaning can manifest itself in the world in front of you, and say to yourself, well, that does feel like the right choice, as opposed to, well, if I was free enough, I wouldn't do it. The freedom sort of still comes from an underlying this is what the world is telling me to do, and I keep saying that, but you know, as I keep saying, there isn't like a distinct separation between anything, especially the self and the world. And to merely, for example, just to like throw another philosopher in, like Nietzsche says that we're not just one individual. We are multiple personalities competing with each other.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a friend, Thomas Dillon, who is a philosopher that I recently came into contact with. He's a really interesting guy. We're both really interested in lingual determinism and conceptualization and stuff like that. And I read some of what he had to say on philosophy and consciousness, and he says that very nicely that we felt even the coldest, most rational philosophy is still predicated on metabolia or metabolic instincts, like what the body tells you to do. It's never as simple as I can choose to do this because I'm a free autonomous rational agent. We are determined by our mood, by so much by our mood. Just to talk about that, and what makes us happy is a big is a huge determinant. Is that the word? Determinant of what we're going to do. How we're going to see the world and how we're going to act on it. So, I think Sartre's idea is very good, but I think it ignores both the metabolic state of human nature, and also perhaps a spiritual one, because I'm a very spiritual person, and I believe those spiritual experiences are very important to me. But they are very important to me. But I believe they're also very useful experiences to have. And it's a sort of strange synthesis when I'm trying to synthesize this sort of existential view, which is very watertight with the spiritual sense. So
Yeah, I mean that it's interesting about the metabolic state of the body. Like everything is coming through a human vessel, so how can it not be affected? And even like if you look at like Aristotelian logic, like the trivium, the logical fallacies that were laid out, that's kind of like a way of preventing us from going off course of the logic too far because of human fallibility, you know, or people acting in bad faith. But then it's still those logical fallacies, it still becomes circular because then you have the fallacies fallacy. So if you keep pointing out people's logical fallacies, you might be accused of using the fallacies fallacy. Well, just because they're using logical fallacies, it doesn't mean that their argument is wrong. It's just that they've not explained it properly. You know?
I think I've come across that like once before. That's very interesting. It's interesting stuff. Because yeah, I mean that makes a lot of sense actually. Just to make a just to make a point on it. That's yeah.
So that's not it's not watertight, you know, that's the point. I've just written a couple more things down that you were saying about
Go on.
Sartre.
I'll try and rectify anything. I mean, like this is what I've got from how much I've read of existentialism as a humanism, and a fair amount of other secondary literature. But and I'm no expert. I'm no expert, and like I probably get a lot of things wrong.
Yeah, no.
So if anyone does notice anything that like I've said that's completely wrong or anything I believe that's wrong, then please comment and I'll reply when I'm sober. So.
But this is stuff like not to strawman Sartre, but it is stuff that I've heard other people say as well. Yeah. So when he was talking about even if you have a vision from God, you're still free to choose.
Yeah.
I feel that if he is making these arguments, but certainly other people who say arguments like this, I feel like they are straw manning Christians. A lot of the arguments against spiritualism, shall we say, they're actually based on pagan argument, like paganism. Rather than Christianity. Christianity came and made a distinction from paganism. Paganism has the sky daddy concept. Paganism has the idea of heaven and hell, and if you please the gods, you're going to go to heaven where you can enjoy yourself all day long. Paganism is about visions from God and what will you do with that vision. And especially when the word morality comes into it, that also seems to be a backlash against kind of Christian morality. And I just feel like there's so many straw man arguments going on.
Yeah.
And I don't know, he's set up these hypotheticals. Well, even if you have a vision from God, you've still got a choice. How are you even going to prove that? Like, it just begs so many questions, you know, like what is a vision from God? Would you have a choice? Would it be God's will that you did what he said, or was he giving you the choice? If you had the choice, surely that would have been his will. It wasn't your choice that you were born. That it's
well, I think it begs the so again, like yeah. So I think it begs the question of like, if it was an intervention from a real God as opposed to a sort of, for example, I think maybe the best way to think about it is a sort of false deity that still controls the world. That this idea that there's a false deity that controls the world, and he's telling you what's right and what's wrong, and that supposing that was a genuine experience that you had, and you didn't feel it as if it was the right choice, then I don't know how it could be like a proper intervention from an actual God, for example. And I'm not Christian. I believe you're sort of in the not in the faith, but like Well, I'm not sure what I'd say you were, but yeah. So it's a weird one for sure, because if the if a false deity were to sort of present you with this whole, this is what you're supposed to do, and it wasn't a transcendent experience that that you sort of felt in your being, then I'm not it's a strange one to figure out, actually. It is a strange one. I wonder if you have any like thoughts on.
I mean, like actual visions, like that are described in the Bible. Like, for example, one of the most famous ones is Joseph, Mary's husband. And he was supposed to believe that she didn't get pregnant by somebody else, but that God impregnated her, right? So it's
Right.
quite a lot to ask of the poor guy. And an angel came to him, so you could say that was a vision.
Yeah.
There's all different stories like that, and each time the person receiving the vision doesn't know whether it is God or not. And so, and they doubt it, and then what they do is they try and follow along anyway, and then after that they realize that it was the right decision. So it must have come from God. So there's no sort of I feel like these arguments lead you towards kind of the white light experience, like that notion of God and visions and things like that, where all of a sudden you're just going to be given all knowledge and then you know what to do. And it's not like that. It's not described like that in the Bible. That's not what people describe. And in, different religious writings as well, he kind of doesn't come in and just implant knowledge in your head and then you know everything. Like even Jesus, when he was about to be crucified, is supposedly the Son of God, all knowing. He was still questioning his father. He was like, why am I here? I don't understand why I've got to go through with this, but if it's your will, I'll go through with it. He wasn't kind of sitting there going, yeah, this one's in the bag, I definitely know it's from God
Right.
and I'm not scared. So even that tells me, that's powerful to me, because it says even the best person, the most spiritual person, was still doubting God's existence at that time.
I mean, I heard like because Plato makes an argument that, like, the difference between God and God's will and the good, but a theologian kind of argues against that, and it was kind of it was a very thought-provoking idea, which is like, so Plato's idea is that if God told you to do something awful, would that be good? Obviously, if that's the case, then God is not the same thing as the good. But a theologian said that that would never happen, because God's will is equatable with the good. There's no difference at all, and the difference is a mere lingual construct. So even if, excuse me, even if God's will was, for so God's will would be, would always be the good will. So even if, so that's what I was going to say, even if morality was down to subjective immediate choice, the right choice would still be under what you might refer to as God's will. So the whole notion the whole notion seems a bit like a lingual problem, rather than a
Yeah.
rather than a an actual problem that needs to be explored in the real world. Like there would be that, between the actual God, which is equatable with, which in my idea is sort of equatable with the world itself. That, the right decision merely is the right decision, and it sounds tautological, but there's no actual.
Yeah.
Does that make,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's, yeah.
Totally makes sense, because there are no contradictions in nature, right? It's a lie or an error, and it's language problems. All these things get answered in the Bible, honestly. Like that, the whole thing about would God ever ask someone to do something bad? That happens in the story of Abraham, where Abraham imagines that God's telling him to sacrifice his son, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
we don't really find out what Abraham was thinking. It looks like he was just having a delusion to me. It doesn't actually say that God told him to do that, you know. But right at the last minute, an angel came down and said, "What are you doing?" You know, but that's kind of like, we know that that's bad. That's an extreme example of, you know, doing a bad deed. Not least because it's human sacrifice, but his own son as well. Yeah, so it's like, well, you could say that. You could make these arguments, these hypotheticals, but it doesn't make sense, really. There's also the thing about God created good and evil, and it says that in the Bible. And obviously, that is, of course, he did. You know, if he's omnipotent, even if you don't believe in God, you don't have to get on board with the idea of, if he's all powerful, evil can't come in without his say so, right? At least. So he may as well have created it. You know. There's so many things to explore. There's
I
like,
know
there's so many details.
it's yeah, it is a it's a yeah, I mean, I'm pretty out of my depth, but I think it's still I think it's still interesting to like explore these.
It's like you'd have to go through and define each term,
Yeah.
you know. But the idea of, I also wrote down, hopefully I could segue a little bit, about objective morality. Morality, yeah, morality doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's not a thing. It's all in relation to the world and how it works. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, man. I mean, like, yeah. So again, I'm sort of hammering on about it, but there's a definite like interdependence between what the self governs as right or wrong, and what's actually the case in the world. And I think we should. I think there's a definite like something to be explored where we can remove such a separation and explore. Again, it's a weird one because it comes down to, you know, is what we want different from what the world wants from us, I suppose. And that's kind of, you know, and I don't think there is. I think what the self determines and what the world wants wants from us in the right way can be a very similar sort of notions.
Do you mean the world as in society, or do you mean like the universe?
I mean like the universe, and
Yeah.
I'm from like a sort of religious or spiritual perspective. Um, God is the you know, like Spinoza was like, you know, Spinoza's ethics was he very much speaks about how there is no difference between God and nature, and if nature, you know, if nature does want these things from us, and I mean, make no mistake, we you know, we are very complex results of nature, then what's the actual? I mean, I mean, I'm genuinely asking because I'm genuinely unsure, and like, you know, yeah, and of course this is just a discussion, but
Yeah, so I mean, the thing is, it's, to me, I believe in like a fractal universe, not in like a physics kind of way, but as above, so below. So you can experience things in your microcosm,
yeah,
and it all has meaning in relation to itself. And that's a reflection of like the macrocosm, you know. So you get like a snippet of it, like a piece. Um, so it doesn't really make sense to contemplate the macrocosm whilst ignoring your own life, you know. I think you should, well, again, it says in the Bible, take care of the small and then you'll have a piece of the big, something like that. But
Yeah,
you have to put that first, like your own life. And if you look at the way the universe is, like, for one, it is rather than it is not. So it tells me that God's will is for me to be here, and for me to be, and for me to function perfectly as everything in nature does. Obviously, there's mutations and things that don't work properly, stuff like that. But on the whole, everything has been designed and it's there to carry out a particular function. Animals do what they're programmed to do. They don't have weird ideas coming in and, you know, things stopping them from being animals. It seems like humans are the ones who are able to be become defective at what we're supposed to be here for, you know.
yeah.
Whatever that is.
Or that we don't have a function at all, which is what Sartre is also very, very on. But please go on, please, I'm listening.
But I mean, would you say that we have less of a function than animals do?
Well, that's the thing, because I it's a weird one. I think it could come down to something as simple as we get sidetracked. You know, we're possessed with these weird notions on sort of states of affairs in reality that simply aren't, such as, you know, such as I mean from my perspective, it's conceptualizations and, you know, sort of seeing the world as through representations and lingual forms rather than what it actually is. And I think that's the thing that gets us sidetracked from seeing the world as it is. And of course we can, you know, of course we can simply choose, we can choose what, you know, how we act in the world, but only after we get rid of these sort of notions of representation. And is that, yeah?
So I might be on the wrong lines here. If we, for example, if we went back like thousands and thousands of years and we were just humans, we had no language,
Yeah.
we got up in the morning and we, you know, went out hunting and we reproduced and we did everything that was functional, and because there was no language, that's one of the reasons. But just because we were functioning so well, there was no opportunity for us to become defective.
Yeah.
But that goes back to original sin, because the way
Yeah.
humans are, we have been given the potential to become corrupt, and we have to become corrupt in order to be human rather
Yes,
than
that's the whole. Yeah,
animal. Yeah.
that's what I was going to say
And
actually.
I've seen that in my own life where I'm spending a lot of time around addicts. Okay, would it have been better for those addicts to never have been exposed to trauma and just to have lived their lives, never becoming addicted to substances, performed their function and then died? Or is it better for them to have been exposed to trauma, become addicts, cause carnage, and then come out of it with the knowledge of good and evil, right? Which is what it talks about in original sin, and for them to choose the good and not just be programmed to choose the good.
Yes, yes. I'm about that. I'm about that. Yeah. I think being presented with horrors is a very nice way of, yeah, coming out with it, sort of knowing both, and, you know, to even move away from existentialism. I just think that in general is I think it's far more interesting, as you know, as human beings to have the opposites of of being faced with the ability to do all these awful things.
Yeah.
and to be defective and to like come out the other side with a sort of grasp on, you know, both what you can do and what you should do, I suppose.
Yeah, and you don't just come out of it and go, oh, well, that was a defective time as my life, you know, like as you were kind of thing, and
Yeah.
carry on. You come out of it with this enrichment of everything, you know, and it's like maybe that's the way that God gets to know himself, because if he is all good, how can he be all good if there's no bad? If he's just all good and he's sitting up there on his cloud, the little sky daddy, you know, how is he going to experience? How is he going to experience himself as a good God
Yeah.
if there is nothing to contrast it with? So maybe that's why we're here.
Yeah, man. I mean, yeah, yeah, right. I do think like, I mean, there's an interesting thing you were saying about like original sin and and like whatever wherever that comes from, you know, whether it was, you know, at the time when, you know, well, at the time when we were created, I suppose. And one question, you know, I just sort of wanted to pose was, would we be human if we didn't possess these, I don't know, rational, lingual, divorce from nature, whatever, wherever it comes from? So that's an interesting thing to think about. And you know, obviously, I'd say that we're not. So I think, God, it is hard to sort of think about exactly what you mean when you've had a few drinks, but
You'll know tomorrow morning when your
I've
serotonin's
only,
down.
oh bloody hell, I know. I've only had two beers as well. It's just quite affecting me quite a bit today. But
Oh, it's not coming across like that, so don't worry.
oh, thank God. Well, I was terrified.
Sorry, I should have said that a lot earlier, shouldn't I? Letting you
I've
stew
never,
on it
well,
there.
I've never drank on a podcast before, so I'm just wondering if what I'm saying is just gobbledygook. But I am really trying to just sort of come to grips with what's real, I suppose. I mean, yeah, who knows what it is, but
That's it. Who knows?
who knows? Should we just end it there? Who really knows, you know? So yeah, so like I think having the ability to contend with what we can, with all the horrible things that we can do with ourselves and other people, and knowing what we should do is a far more interesting experience, you know, for the world in general than just mere animals, I suppose. I mean, it could be a kind of a selfish individualist kind of idea that we should be granted these pleasures of knowing that we can commit awful things. But I think at the least it's an interesting game to play when it comes down to. I think it does come down to that as well. I think the idea of moral good and moral bad doesn't come down to absolutes like evil must be eradicated from the world, and
No,
and we have to fight like the utilitarians do or whatever. Like we have to fight to remove all evil from the world,
no,
and in order to do that, we'd have to remove its history, so imply that it never existed at all, just to make sure it never came up again, or that we actually have the ability to know that we can do bad things, so we can then choose to do the good things, which is, you know, which sounds kind of obvious,
yeah. So then that's, you know, that's the
I think
evolution.
I think it is an. I think it does come down to the fact that there's an interesting game to play, above anything else. I think that we, I think the ability I think the ability for, you know, I think it does come down to the world sort of deciding, not rationally or whatever, but the world deciding through its own means what games it wants to play, as opposed to other games. And I think this is an interesting game to play. And I think it's better to look at it like that because how do I say it? Because it, you know, because if it was sort of determined as like this kind of like the world as this uncaring, unapologetic, not artificial, sort of inanimate mass that just sort of threw things into the world, and we have to just sort of make what we can with it. I think it's right in every respect but one, and the one respect is that we are deprived of how wonderful the experience is, I suppose. If I could say it, if I could say it like that, how
Yeah.
wondrous the whole experience can be, and how important it is. Not important for any particular reason, such as, it's important because we can do this or we can do this, but important because it's a fun game to play. I don't know if I'm using circular reasoning there, but I think I make sense considering my disposition at the moment. So
Yeah. I mean, I know what you're saying. I don't look at it as a game because I've played games before and I know what that feels like, and my life doesn't feel like a game. It's for me, it's about building my intuition rather than my rational mind, and that sounds kind of like I'm trying to throw logic out the window. And
I don't think
it's
so.
not that.
I don't think it does at all. No.
It's about deprogramming and stripping back and finding what is underneath all of the crap that's been piled in over the years, but that's just personal to me. That is certainly the meaning that I have now. But to me, that reflects the bigger picture as well.
Yeah.
Because it's the deciphering of the good and the evil,
Yeah, I mean, I think game is maybe a bad word. Maybe like dramaturgical, because like, it's sort of, this sort of the notion that at the end of the play, the hero and the villain get applauded the same, you know.
Yes. Yeah, like the devil is gonna like pull his mask off and go, only joking, we're friends, really. But because God appointed the devil to do work for
yes,
him,
exactly. This is what I mean.
It's not this sort of scary, or it's not. It shouldn't be scary like that. That's something else that I've realized as well.
Well, the devil's God's like he's the district attorney, isn't he? In a certain way, appointed to do God's dirty work. In some respect.
Yeah, well, it did say that he created him. He created evil, and he sends the devil in. He sends strong delusion. Also says the devil will be punished. So that's a bit of a. Won't go into that one tonight, but that seems that's quite an interesting concept.
A lot of stuff that's very out of my depth, but I'm still very excited to talk about it. But like,
me too.
Yeah, I just wish I wasn't drinking. But anyway.
Now you do. You started now. You're at the three drinks.
the holy trinity of alcohol.
Is that not where you just want to carry on until you pass out?
Well, luckily, I sort of, I can hold back after a while, but that's just me.
See, I do not relate to that concept.
Yeah, right. I mean, it is nice to sort of drink until until it's time to go to bed, but I don't necessarily want to drink until I black out, I suppose.
Yeah,
because
so
I find that quite a scary concept. I find that quite a scary concept, to be honest. Like, because I know what it's like to like be like in the blackout stage, and I find it terrifying. I think it's quite a terrifying experience. But yeah, it is going back. It is interesting that. Oh, Jack, could you go this way? I'm just terrified you're going to unplug and plug it and then.
I think it's more dangerous on that direction, isn't it? Yeah.
It is because then you might unplug it and then it will die and then it won't save.
And it'll be God.
It'll all be gone and we'll have to do the whole thing again. And I'll be even more drunk. Jack's microwaved some curry that I made yesterday, and it smells really good. I'll probably have to get some as soon as this is over.
Very nice.
You have the rest of the rice. Oh, cool. All right.
So we were going to talk about morality. All right. And I can't remember what my train of thought was. So I've been criticized before for being a moral relativist. All right.
You have, okay.
Yeah. And it's not because, I mean, again, it was a straw man argument. It always is, you know. Well, if something's illegal in one country, then how can it be legal in another country? And then it's moral in one country and it's immoral in another country. That's not how I think of it.
Yeah, well, that's not. I mean, like, no country has a perfect legal system anyway, so.
No, so the people who criticized me for that was a group that I used to hang around with, and like an online community, and they're very into like Aleister Crowley. They'll deny that it's Aleister Crowley, but if you read Crowley's writings, it's basically that. So
I mean, educate me. I don't know exactly what.
So similar to Sartre, you know, you can make your own choices, but you're responsible for the consequences.
Yeah.
Most of the time, that'll mean that people are not doing anything that kind of wacky because of the natural consequences are going to keep them in line somewhat.
That sounds pretty accurate, actually.
Yeah.
As far as I know, yeah.
But his main thing is do no harm. So, which on the surface sounds okay, but you start delving into that and you ask, well, what is harm?
Yeah.
That's very hard to pinpoint anyway. But then also, who gets to judge what actions cause harm or not? Because how do you know that your actions are not going to affect kind of, you know, the 6 degrees of separation thing? You may cause harm to somebody, you don't know you've caused them harm, and you're still saying that action was moral. So I did subscribe to that belief system for quite a while, as long as I wasn't causing direct harm to the best of my knowledge, then whatever I was doing was moral. It's totally based on self-will. It's all self-will.
But this is the sort of the perverse will, I suppose.
Yeah, do as thou wilt. That's what Crowley said. Do as thou wilt. So however you were designed, basically everyone was designed for a different purpose, and you should find out what that purpose is and just roll with that and don't encroach on anybody else's rights. But that again sets the person up in a position where they're playing God, because they've got to decide what's best for them, what's going to cause harm to another person and what's not. Whilst accepting the consequences. But sometimes, I mean, if we're honest, sometimes there aren't consequences for your actions, or they happen a lot further down the road. So
that's interesting.
That it's quite big. It was a bit of a niche community, but when I've looked at where that philosophy comes from, it's quite commonplace, and you'll hear people say it, well, as long as they're not causing any harm and it's you know, that everybody's consenting or whatever, then that's okay. And that's what morals are.
I can think of one example that, like, I know you won't agree with me on, but like it definitely comes down to, you know, what you actually define as harm, and what you define as harm might not be very true to what actually causes suffering down the line, right? And that's a definite point to think about for sure.
Yeah,
Like,
and suffering isn't necessarily evil. Like some of the best things that can happen to you come out of suffering,
yes,
you know.
yes.
So it's just placing the person in a very powerful position when they're not qualified for the job, basically. But then I also don't believe that morals are, you know, you should never do this and you should always do this. That it's just, it doesn't match up to reality. So that's why I was called a moral relativist, because I believe that one action in one context is right and the same action in a different context would be wrong.
Yeah. I mean,
And it's not because I'm judging the outcome, it's because I'm trying to rely on my intuition and not have the self-will and the managing of the potential consequences, you know.
yeah. I mean, this is sort of interesting to talk about, like lingual paradoxes, and you could never pin morality down to a single lingual phrase, because, as I argue, quite, you know, much more confidently in my book than right now, because, you know, but that language has these functions. Language has functions of, you know, how to perceive and act on the world. And these functions don't match up to reality. Like, language is always going to imply this and not this, and this and not this, regardless of what you're saying. And also that reality is infinitely complicated. Well, not maybe not, you know, but pretty infinitely complicated, if we can say that. And you could never pin it down to some perfect verbal axiom that everything else can be predicated on. It doesn't, you know, obviously, as you said, it doesn't match up to reality. I think it's, you know, to sort of be able to pin it all down to some phrase that perfects everything doesn't make any sense. It doesn't even matter how long the phrase is. You're still going to leave something out, which is you know, which is obviously why conversation is so important. But yeah, I'm not sure where I was going with that, but it's definitely, I mean, yeah, right. And I don't even think you are a moral relativist, because it just sounds like you're not subscribing to this one moral position. That doesn't mean that you're not a
No,
moral.
it's all it is, because I've thought about this, right? What they're doing, they're looking at the action, but they're not looking at the intention and the context.
Yes.
So they're the
Which is
same
everything.
people. What, that's part of the truth. You can't have a truth without it, all the components of it. Like that's a partial truth, you know. So they're the same people who would say, well, you murder is wrong, but if someone breaks into your property, you've got the right to shoot them because they're on your property, right?
Yeah.
Is that not moral relativism because it's killing somebody? But you're saying, but in the context of you being burgled, it's okay to kill. But because they've changed the word to murder, which that includes like an intention and a context as well in the word murder, because it's not,
Yeah.
it's different to killing, you know. I argued that they're a moral relativist because they're looking at the action, whereas I'm looking at the intention, which should always come from the spirit, right? That's my axiom. So that's the opposite of moral relativism, because it's always got to be spirit led for it to be moral. That was the argument that I was making anyway. So again, it comes down to it's the language again.
It always is.
It changes context.
As far as I'm aware, language always does seem to be the culprit. And I mean, just from my findings, I think it's very interesting how different rationality and language actually is. And that's one of the recent things that I've discovered, is that, like, as far as I'm aware, that rationality is a certain way of acting on the world, or, like, you know, it's a hard thing to pin down, but, like, you know, rationality is based off of, you know, actual truths, should we say. Like, if you're rational about something, then you're being truthful about something. But language actually is embodied with all of these falsities about how to perceive the world and how to act on it that don't necessarily match up. But the annoying thing is that language is the only way we can communicate rationality. So even if Crawley had the right idea with, one must do no harm, he may have been conveying a rational point of the world, but the problem with language is that it has this baggage of assumptions and imperatives and processions on what it means to say those words that may not match up to either the rationality that he did say or a real rationality, that one that he wasn't saying about the actual world and its dispositions. This is the problem. So as you were saying, they call you a moral relativist because you want to just subscribe to the real and what the real actually says, what the real world is telling you to do. And this is the problem, because people who get caught up in lingual games of this person said exactly the right thing and it's everything in their text is correct because text is perfect. Well, I'm not saying that that's what it actually happens, but it's the wrong way of it's the wrong way of looking at language. Language is a tool to represent reality, so you can see reality for how it actually is. It's not language is not an end in itself. Language is always a means in which to represent an actual state of affairs in the world.
Yeah, and that should come first before you start assigning language to it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then I think, people try and change reality to fit in with the language, and it should be the way around.
Yeah, people should. Yeah. People should definitely be subscribing to what This is. I mean, this is. I mean, I wrote a little thing in the book today, which I haven't got. Have I got it up at the moment? I say, well, I'm not sure if it's going to stay in, but I say human natures, such as desire to seek morality, would be better founded if we paid more attention to the truth of the world, or the real, and the truth of the world is devoid of unrealities pertaining to the illusory nature of concepts, language, and physistic representations of reality which hold no credence. So I wrote that when I was more sober, and but yeah, I think I think it does. I think it does. I think I'm trying to illustrate a point about how morality should never be based off of conceptions that appear to be outside of what the world actually is, and the biggest unrealities that we can even have an idea of, because we can't be, our concepts and language and representations, because you can't conceive of an idea that can't be conceived. The unrealities that are in our world are conceptual and lingual unrealities. There's no other unreality we can even think of, so it doesn't even matter. Like the unreality of a unicorn. Well, I've still got the idea of a unicorn in my head as a representation of an idea of a horse with a horn. So to begin with, so to make a point, those are the unrealities that we are faced with, and I think those unrealities are actually our biggest problem, because unrealities such as capitalism is a perfect system because of this, or communism is a perfect system because of this, are muddied with metaphysical ideas of, communism is based off of an idea of the world that is outside of the world, such as human beings should be equal, or capitalism's the idea that human beings should be free, or whatever. And they are they are based off of lingual, as far as I'm aware, they're based off lingual and conceptual notions that are outside. Rather, maybe human beings ought to be a little bit free, or maybe something that the word free points to, and human beings should also be equal, but something that the word equal points to, and also an infinite number of other things that we completely ignore, such as I don't know, just simply being in the world, which isn't even worth speaking about, because language needs to affirm something as existing and existing separately before we even get into that. So we have to, you see what I'm getting
Yeah,
at?
I do. I think I saw this debate on YouTube the other day about our worker co-ops, right? And there was this communist guy on there, and he was talking about like the communist philosophy, which, like you said, it's not rooted in reality. It's something that's out there.
Yeah, neither.
Whether we agree with it or not, you know. But yeah, he was talking about obviously egalitarianism, all of that. And his ideas were great, and he explained it in perfectly logical way. And he had facts and evidence to back up what he was saying, like for some of it. And then there was a guy on there, he called himself a neoliberal. So he believes in worker co-ops as well. Like, he was basically a communist, but he was more rooted in, look, let's stop talking about that and let's start talking about who we should vote for, who's going to be more communist than the other person, and who's actually going to get some bills passed in Congress, like to make steps towards where this other guy wanted us to be, you know. So
The,
he
the,
had
the
like,
neoliberal was saying that.
yeah,
Okay.
he was being practical about it.
Yeah.
But like the two things kind of complemented each other. Like the utopian guy, he was like the ideas guy, and then the practical person who was working with what he already had. He wanted to work with what we'd already got, and like, who are our voting options right now, and who's going to bring us more towards the utopia, you know. And the relationship between those two things, I found, it wasn't contradictory. There was enough pushback against each other for the argument to progress, and you could really start to understand the points, you know. So that's one way that it kind of worked, but you had the two separate angles, kind of butting heads with each other, and that's why it worked. But with arguments, I don't want to go back to Sartre, but I will anyway. If he did indeed say this, but for people who do come up with similar arguments about would we still have a choice if there was a vision from God, you can start waxing lyrical with these ideas, and there's no pushback against it, because it's kind of too far away from reality, you know.
And that's the interesting, because I don't think reality can. This is the problem with language, because you can't communicate reality, because in order to communicate it, you have to push it through an unreality of language. So even maybe with these two people that you're talking about, it can all make sense, but it may not actually have any standing in reality. And that's not to say make a leap of faith into some dogma that just says this is what it is, because that's also wrong. You need to actually see the world for yourself, and not see it through even statistics, because statistics can be meddled with to represent whatever you want them to represent. Yeah. So
So do you think that, say, like with the neoliberal guy, if he got his way, he would vote for, like, I think he was saying he would vote for Joe Biden.
okay. Yeah.
And that, I mean, you know, he made a good point as to why to vote for him, though, despite the fact that he's a creepy pervert and all of that. But he was saying that, you know, that his policies are closer to where we want it to be.
Yeah.
So And then obviously you might do that and then things go wrong and then you would reassess. But do you think that's the best way to keep things rooted in reality? Just kind of do something and then see what happens?
No, I mean, yeah, but like, but there's so many other angles in which to approach it, even angles of just enriching your own community and helping your own community, or like, for example, I don't know, making a commune and building the commune just to see what happens there, then encouraging other people to build communes and build societies that are civilly and peacefully oppose ideas of the big state. But like, there's so many other ways of going about it than just simply voting for someone who's an alleged rapist, as far as I'm aware. So that, I mean,
No, I mean, I'm not,
no,
just using that as an example.
I know you're not. It's fine. It's fine. I know you're not. But I think it, yeah. But like, I don't think so. I think voting for Joe Biden or Donald Trump, Biden, voting for them, voting for either of them, sort of buys in. I mean, they're both fucking awful, in my opinion.
This
Like,
is what I mean. Do you choose? Is it more rooted in reality to choose the lesser of two evils and see where that gets you, or do you just totally remove yourself from all of that because you believe it's immoral?
well, the thing is, I would offer a pragmatic approach because I'm a big guy on pragmatism. I believe that we should be pragmatic as creatures, and we can't be idealistic. We should never be idealistic because we always have to accept the world as it is and accept it before we do anything. We should never think, oh, the world would be so much better if this was happening, or that, if these injustices aren't happening, because it simply isn't the case. And you're going to have no navigation on how to actually obtain a better society or world, or whatever you want to call it, without, if you do have these idealistic notions. And there's also no need to be idealistic because the world in itself, and I do talk about the world a lot as if I'm in love with it, but like, I don't. It kind of is like, it definitely holds credence for me, but the world itself is here, and I'm not in excruciating pain right now, so I should be, I should be pretty thankful. But how do I put this into the right? Yeah. So I believe we should be pragmatists for sure. I think pragmatism is the only solution. But what I'd argue against is the idea that Joe Biden is a lesser of two evils at all. I don't think there's even a choice when it comes to the two-party system.
Well, in terms of implementing socialism, he would be the closer option.
But like, what sort of socialism is he offering? I mean, there's many different brands of socialism, but like, I don't even think, even if socialism is a more correct view of reality, that it's even going to bring out anything good under his implementations. I mean, I don't know well enough. I mean, I think it ignores all the things that we can do as creatures than to even think about voting Joe Biden. Like, I think to even think, is Joe Biden is Joe Biden the senile, alleged rapist, perhaps the lesser of two evils, is to ignore, perhaps as Sartre would even say, our own radical freedom to even just decide to refuse to pay your taxes because it goes to military warfare or whatever it is. I think it ignores the our actual freedom to just, at least decide or discover what we are supposed to do, I suppose.
But his argument was that he was just being pragmatic.
I don't think it is pragmatic, because I think a second that you spend worrying about the election of Joe Biden or the senile alleged rapist and Donald Trump, also the same kind of situation, is even, I don't think that really is pragmatic, because it retracts or forgets what you can actually do as a person. I think to even think about that notion of maybe this guy will be ever so slightly better, even though he probably won't be, it completely dismisses what we can actually do as people, and simply ignoring all of that, and then just coming up with a new thing to do, even in your community, such as, I don't know, even charity work, for example, or something like, or anything, or building a commune, or, as I say in the book, going to a coffee shop and paying with your labor rather than your money to dissolve the idea of money, if that's what you believe. I think those sorts of things can be more pragmatic. But I think buying into this ridiculous two-party system in the US is almost anti-pragmatic. It gets you stuck in the concepts and idealistic notions of, oh, maybe if I vote for him, then he's going to make things slightly better, and I can put all my money on him, and then I don't have to think about things that I can do to make things better in any other way. Hold on, I think my internet's gone down. No internet connection. Are we still online? Can you still hear?
I am. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. It says no internet connection at the moment, but if you're still online, then I suppose. If not, I can just stop the recording and then just come back. But yeah, I'll keep going if you can still hear me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's completely I think it's completely anti-pragmatic to I think it's still idealistic to go into it, sort of say, oh, I'll put my money on Joe Biden, and I can't say his fucking name properly for some reason. Joe Biden? Is it Joe Biden? Is it Joe?
I think it's Biden.
I think it's Biden. Okay, I'll stop saying Biden for fuck's sake. Joe Biden. I think it's
Just call him the creepy perv.
Which one though? Which one? They're both are, but yeah. I think it's anti-pragmatic to vote for Joe Biden, and in this idea that he's going, and then say, oh well, there's nothing I can do now because I've done the thing that will push things slightly better. When you could literally be talking to, I don't know, like your council, and say, I'm creating this society because we don't agree with this, and then contacting everyone and saying, I'm creating this society to oppose this law on this, and we're not going to implement this, or building a commune and getting woodworkers to say, I would like to build a commune. We're going to live outside of this law and what these systems offer, or many other things that you can do if you just tap into
these are not my arguments, all right, but you should debate him.
I know they're not.
I mean, obviously the pushback against that would be, well, we have to, we're going for a revolution, and we want to change the whole system, and you've got to do that within the system,
What other ways are they actually? This is the problem, man, because in what ways are they actually seeking to improve the system that they're in? And this is the problem with subscribing to this idea of the nation state, which is just ridiculously massive in America's state. You've got 300 million people, and it's just such a big system. And even though it is federalist and you have different states, it all seems to come down to, let's the neoliberals or the economic rightists try and push this tiny bit further in this direction, and the leftists try and push this tiny bit in the direction, and it all cancels out, and instead they don't look to, dare I say, reality and what's actually immediate to them, such as real problems that might be occurring in their actual society, and pragmatically going through how to actually change those things. So if you do believe in a freer market, then go out there and put that change, or at least try and implement that change, or talk to people who you might make that slightest bit of change with.
Yeah, but their argument
Go on.
is you need to get the government involved in order for the workers to seize the means of production. Right? I'm not a socialist.
I know you're not.
But I understand the arguments, you know, and it's the thing, well, why don't you set your business up as a worker co-op? But they're not, they're just contractors. It's, you have to do it through the system because the system's already there and stuff like that.
Well, obviously, but it depends on which way you're actually tackling the system. Like,
but the point is, his boundaries obviously are totally different to yours, but it looks like it is still pragmatism, you know.
I still don't agree because I believe there are limitless ways to actually change things, and that's evidential in history, and in some cases it's violent and bloody, but not in all cases. You know, just simply documenting what's actually going on can change things, and simply like there are so many other ways to actually approach changing things as opposed to just voting Joe Biden.
Yeah, I mean, I think I mean, not to be, you know, sort of co-signing these commies, but, you know, that's not the only thing, you know, that, I'm not sure how we got on this topic though, anyway.
Well, it was all about, it came from, I think it came from like viewing, you know, sort of seeing reality, and then it turned into, you know, communists and capitalists both subscribing to their own ideologies, and then it came to...
Well, I think it was about how things can things can get too hypothetical for it to be even classed as being rooted in reality anymore.
Yes. Yeah.
Is it?
I think it was. I think it was. Yeah. I think it was. But yeah, like I just, again, I sort of think there are limitless ways to actually change things, as you know, and I think subscribing to the idea that voting Joe Biden is going to Joe Biden is going to change things makes you lazy. I think saying, oh well, I can vote for him, like, you know, I've done my bit, as opposed to dedicating your mental energy into, I don't know, for example, building a commune and saying, well, you know, because you get all the libertarians, you know, the economic rightists that will share on Facebook groups and then share their arguments, and then they might convert a couple of leftists to their ideology, and then you have the communists or the socialists that share, and get some libertarians to come over to them, and nothing ever changes because there are so many other issues that aren't to do with economic leftism or rightism, and how do I, you know, there are so many other immediate problems in the world that we can actually tackle. And even if the immediate problems are economic, such as economic leftism or economic rightism, you can still tackle them in a pragmatic way by going out and simply, I don't know, doing what, you know, you know, for example, setting up a coffee shop where people pay what they want, or whatever it is. I'm not saying people go out and do that, but I'm saying, you know, or, you know, pay, you know, offering to pay with your labor rather than your money, to dissolve the concept of money. Or I mean, I'm trying to think of other ways to actually do it, but like I'm sure people could come up with something, you know, going, you know, that I think we're much more capable than we realize. But I don't think capability comes from simply voting for which senile president you'd prefer. And that's
Well, I mean, you don't have to tell me that, because I've never voted, but like for those reasons. But I've just been lately, just within the last few months, I've been just considering if I might have the whole picture on it. And that's why I've started reading some different things and listening to some opinions that I had Dunning-Kruger effect on, really. I thought I could easily dismiss these arguments, and then I've realized that I've been straw manning a whole section of people for a long, long time. So that's been quite eye-opening, you know. But it's not going to change my fundamental belief system. I've just kind of seen how belief systems are like sandcastles, you know, most of them.
Yeah. I've always sort of taken a weird bit of comfort in the notion that there's someone that agrees with you that's much more qualified to his position than you are, and there's someone that disagrees with you who's much more qualified to take his position than you are.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I think I've had that idea. I mean, yeah, it's I think that's an interesting thing to think about. But there are still truths in your world that those two people could not go against. You know, truths of how you ought to act in the world, and things that you consider to be right or wrong based on your experiences, which can't be written down based on qualification. So, yeah, I think I want to subscribe to the idea that pragmatism is not as simple as voting on a two-party system. I think, I'm going to read this book about chaos by James Affleck, or I forget his name, but like I've read the blurb, and but like I want to read more about how chaos can affect things, because I think it will help my ideas of, it could help my ideas about how one little thing can change everything. And simply one, it's like one simple social act saying, like, I don't agree with paying this because I think the price is wrong, could change everything. And then suddenly, or simply refusing to work somewhere. I had this idea: if everyone refused to work at Asda, if everyone refused, and you just said, everyone, let's refuse to work at Asda because we think that the job isn't worth the money, and then everyone stopped, then Asda would have to raise its prices. But like that's just a little thing that's sort of.
But again, is that hypothetical? Because like is that the same as saying, well, if everybody's head just exploded, it's like, is that going to happen?
No, but again, yeah, right. But this still doesn't defeat the point of pragmatism, because if you can't affect everything, then there's no point in worrying about it. So you can do what you can do, and that's it. You can't, this is why a lot of careful reflection on what you actually can do in the world, and I stress in your immediate community, is so important, because worrying about, oh, maybe I won't affect things, isn't pragmatic, because you're again subscribing to the idea that, like, that your actions are going to have this big consequence in the world that's all going to work out in your favor. That's not really the point of pragmatism, in my opinion. So, does that make sense?
Yes. So is pragmatism about one person doing something for it? So like, well, I'm going to do this because I know it's right.
Yeah.
It's not about setting an example with the view to hopefully other people will cotton on and start doing the same thing. It's not about numbers.
Well, it can. I mean, I get. I don't. Yeah. I never claim to be an expert on pragmatism. These are just like my opinions on things. But it's. I think working out how you can influence other people to do the same thing is also a part of pragmatism. So it's not the case that you're just doing things with the hope, doing things without any hope that you'll affect people. And it isn't the case that you're doing it because you're going to affect people.
Mm-hmm.
And you're going to idealize this notion of affecting affecting everyone, and then hopefully once I affect everyone, then the world will be a better place. It's
Yeah.
it's neither. It's the notion that you're going, it's the notion that it's if you want something to happen in the world, then you're going to carefully reflect on how to do that and how to actually implement those changes, rather than just hope that people are going to be swayed by what you have to say. Actually convince them
Yeah.
to
So it's the hypocrisy fallacy, that, isn't it? Because it's like I could turn around to you and go, oh, well, you believe that market socialism is a good thing.
yeah,
Well, so why are you not running your business like a worker co-op?
yeah,
But that I would be using the hypocrisy fallacy,
yes,
because it doesn't necessarily follow that just because you're not using market socialism in your personal life, that you then have no right to advocate for market socialism.
no. And you might be on the, you might be on the way to advocating market socialism in the end, but you simply can't do that at the time. So like, you know, this is the idea of the commune. You might have to start out with the commune in charging people to visit, and charging people food and stuff, and then slowly you can you can uh you can start to strip away the need for monetary value if you are a communist, and and slowly, you charge people, and then you grow food, and then you grow shelter, and then you find a way of sustaining yourself, and then you can strip away the need for money. But to simply say this is a bad idea, therefore we shouldn't do it at all, doesn't actually have it doesn't seem it doesn't actually have like it won't last, right? You'll never actually get anywhere if you like, there's that idea that there's no ethical consumption under capitalism, which I don't agree to, because I have to go out and I have to get tomatoes and bread so I can and cheese so I can live. And those tomatoes and bread may not have reliably come from ethical sources, but I still have to do that to eat.
Because because they have the monopoly on the means of production, or
whatever it is,
where it comes from.
Well, exactly. But like, I'm still not going to stop myself from going out and buying food so I can eat, right? So
Right.
And even if I deprived myself of that and said I'm not going to do that, and then I starved to death, it might make a news in the headline, this man starved himself to death because he disagreed with the ethical consumption, and then people would have a debate about it, and then people would move on. It doesn't actually solve anything.
Yeah. Okay. So you're not. Yeah. It's
you're not real. It's not real.
You're not being a jihadist about it, basically, about your beliefs. Right. Like, I believe this, and I'm gonna kamikaze myself to make a point, and then that's it. You're dead.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing is that violent, bloody revolution can work. It's just not necessarily the best idea. And if you don't agree with that, then it's not pragmatic to do that, because you simply disagree with it. I think it's as simple as that. If you simply disagree with something you do, then you're sacrificing too much. But there's so many ways to do things. There's so many ways to do things, as I say. It's so yeah. I think it's far more complicated than just simply I have to commit violent, bloody revolution, or I have to completely adhere to the system, because both will continue the system that you exist in. You have to actually think about what you can do.
Yeah, so you've got to use your intelligence and all of that.
Yeah, and your creativity and all of that, right? I mean, this is just what I believe at the moment. You know, I'm not appealing to any like.
No, I
you know.
believe in that because I think, yeah, it comes down to that bad faith actor again.
Yeah.
If you're not incorporating, you're leaving out the context, or you're not coming at it with a balanced judgment. It's unhealthy. Usually, I would say it's unhealthy to set yourself on fire in protest. You know, that's not. Yeah, and then
I think it is
the other side of it, just adhering to the system. That's also, you could argue that's not a very, that's maybe a weak person or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Should we end there? I mean, we went on this for like an hour and a half.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Right. Well, it's been a very interesting conversation, Rachel.
We got off topic there. I don't think I should have mentioned Joe Biden.
I don't think it's going to be controversial, especially if he does get elected.
No, I mean, it just kind of derailed the whole thing. I feel like I just derailed it by mentioning it.
I think I spoke my best when we were speaking about that, actually. Yeah. I think at the beginning.
Oh, okay. Well, that's fine.
I think it was all right. I think it was all right, as far as I'm aware, but I'm drunk. So. So we're going to thank our honourable mentions, our patrons who wonderfully pledged to the cause. We thank Oliver, who says, yeah, I'll drink to that. We thank Rachel, who is yourself, who says, communism is for life, not just for Christmas. Let me know if you want to change that. Do you remember saying that?
No.
That's your phrase, apparently. Is that right?
Oh my god, that's hilarious! I'm gonna get that on a T-shirt.
You should, yeah. We have Manny, who says long live Wombstone. We have Maisie, who says 9/11 was an inside job, possible future discussion. We have Ryan, who says keep true, be fair, and spread love.